Today, I'm going to teach you the fastest way to connect with any woman you want without seeming desperate or shy. The first concept I'm going to introduce is take your mind off your balls and focus on your head and brain. If you want to connect with new girls, you need to focus on putting energy into truly understanding, entertaining, and deeply getting to know the person. The rest will come magically. Let me explain further. Imagine this scenario. She looked at you, quickly, briefly, but enough for your mind to create an entire universe in seconds. The male brain is a factory of instant stories, and the female brain, a surgical radar of intentions. The moment their eyes meet, something invisible sets in, a silent question. Is this man different, or just another one trying to be accepted? And this is where everything starts to fall apart. Most men, without even realizing it, go into automatic validation mode. They try to appear interesting, intelligent, relaxed. They laugh before the joke. They agree before they understand. They ask too many questions. They talk too much. The result is always the same: neediness disguised as friendliness. And no matter how well you present yourself, if she realizes you're trying to win her over, you've already lost. What few understand is that connection isn't born from trying, but from emotional provocation. It's not about showing off, it's about hiding. It's not about making her laugh, it's about making her feel red. This is the invisible mistake most men make. They try to touch a woman with words, when they should be touching her emotional reality with silence, tension, and rhythm. And this inversion is too brutal for the average man's ego to accept. It's easier to try to be nice than to be unpredictable. Easier to make conversation than to stir up tension. Easier to play it safe than to play it real. This video is about that. About the dark territory where men are rejected without knowing why, and where the rare few who understand the hidden layers of attraction gain access to a kind of connection so intense it seems magical. But it's not magic. It's strategy. What you'll see here aren't rules of social etiquette, nor hackneyed how to start a conversation formulas. You'll enter a realm where every word is a calculated risk, and every silence a high-impact move. Connecting with a woman in the first few seconds is possible, but it requires a skill that goes against everything you've learned. And if that's true, maybe the problem was never what you said, but the fact that you needed to say something. Because when you truly understand the game, you don't go in seeking attention. You go in as if you have something she's about to discover. And in that moment, everything changes. The first lie you've been told about women is that if you just be yourself, everything will fall into place. Be kind, chatty, show interest, show you're different from everyone else. This is the emotional package sold to average men, and the exact reason they remain average. What no one tells you is that this you you're trying to sell was never interesting, because it's predictable. And predictability, in seduction, is death. The human brain disconnects from what it understands too quickly. And every time you try to please someone, you give away your entire map in the first few seconds. The result? She no longer needs to explore. There's no mystery. There's no tension. Just an emotionally naked man, and desperate to be accepted. This is called unsolicited self-exposure, a social phenomenon studied by evolutionary psychology. Men reveal too much too soon, under the illusion that transparency breeds trust. But too much transparency is neediness in disguise. And the effect is devastating. She senses you before you even open your mouth. Because the body speaks, the voice gives it away, the eyes tell the truth, and this reading happens in seconds. Harvard studies on social behavior identify that the human brain forms impressions in less than 7 seconds. Not based on logic, but on primitive emotional reading. We're talking about instinct, not intention. And therein lies the illusion of spontaneous connection. Because what you call connecting naturally is nothing more than an unconscious script programmed by movies, soap operas, and catchphrases that teach men to act as if conquest were a job interview. When in fact, it's a game of emotional layers. And worse, the man who tries to connect too quickly reveals, without realizing it, a devastating addiction to approval. And this addiction manifests itself in the details. The smile that lasts a second too long, the joke that tries to ease the silence, the hurried, "I get it," to appear receptive. These are small gifts of power that add up until you become harmless. And harmlessness equals disinterest. Cleopatra was irresistible because she was unpredictable. She didn't give everything away. She made you deserve every layer. And that's the blind spot of modern men. They confuse being good with being available. But connection isn't born from availability. It's born from contrast, from the feeling that the other person has something you can't immediately access. That's why Casanova wasn't remembered for his beauty, but for the way he made women feel unique. Not through generic compliments, but through a sharp reading of desire and absence. He understood an essential principle of attachment psychology. Everything that is given without resistance loses value, and everything that slips by becomes obsession. You might find this cruel, manipulative, perhaps even dishonest. But ask yourself, what's more authentic? Following a behavioral pattern you learn to be accepted, or taking the risk of being enigmatic, even if it confuses or alienates? The truth is, most men aren't prepared to be truly desired. They're conditioned to be accepted. And there's a stark difference between being desired and being accepted. Being accepted is a game of equals. It's where you adapt, fit in, try to show yourself as good. Being desired is a game of differences. It's where you stand out, create tension, and make the other person lose control. That's why the most intense connections aren't the ones that seem easy. They're the ones that challenge the other person to decipher. And here we enter one of the greatest contradictions of seduction. The more you try to accelerate the connection, the more you kill it. It's like trying to push a seed to bloom. The soil needs tension, silence, presence, not explanations. And if you observe naturally seductive men, you'll see a subtle pattern. They talk less. They listen more. They're always a little out of the social rhythm, but within their own gravitational field. They don't try to connect. They provoke connection. They are magnetic fields, not walking resumes. Machiavelli in The Prince already said, "It is safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." And in the realm of seduction, the modern version of this phrase would be, "It is more effective to be intriguing than to be understood if you wish to be remembered." Because a woman doesn't fall in love with someone who makes sense. She falls in love with someone who generates meaning within her. And the great paradox of all this is that the man who tries to build connection too soon actually reveals a fear of not being enough. He seeks connection as if seeking salvation, as if her gaze were the validation he lacks in his identity. But women don't connect with men who need saving. They connect with men who put them at emotional risk, who trigger parts of her she herself didn't even know existed, who don't ask for entrance. They invade. Not to assault, but to reveal what's hidden. This type of man doesn't ask, "May I?" He asks, "Why?" He doesn't say, "I like that too." He says, "That says a lot about you." He doesn't try to show similarities. He provokes reflection. And because of that, he's not forgotten. Because real connection isn't one that makes sense. It's one that defies meaning, that forces the other person to reorganize their own emotional map. And here we come to the uncomfortable truth. If you're trying to connect with a woman through sympathy, you've already played the wrong game. Sympathy is weak currency. What truly connects are the questions that make her pause, the silences that make her listen, the looks that make her question who you are. And you can't provoke that if you're more concerned with her reaction than with your presence. Real connection doesn't begin when you say the right thing. It begins when you assume you don't need to say anything. Because in that space, mystery is born. And where there's mystery, there's desire. The mistake most men make is trying to generate connection with logic, when they should be doing it with presence, with tension, with scarcity. You want to connect quickly? Then stop trying. Start observing. Read the room, feel the field, slow down, see what she doesn't show. And then instead of trying to create connection, you reveal it, because every connection already exists. What you do is activate the right channel, and that's never logical. It's almost always silent. The first step is to stop seeking connection. The second is to understand that true connection isn't built, it's provoked. And the third is to master the invisible language that activates this emotional field in the first few seconds. Because when you understand this language, you never again enter a conversation trying to be accepted. You enter as if you know something she'll feel, even before you understand. And when you understand this language, the game changes forever. Because what seems casual to most becomes for you a clear emotional map. The environment reveals codes. Her breathing wavers, her gaze wanders, her posture changes. None of this is coincidence. All of this is communication. What differentiates the seducers who break down a woman's emotional resistance in seconds from the men who go unnoticed is the ability to read the invisible and activate the right triggers. Before words, there is rhythm. Before logic, there is vibration. The language that truly connects isn't spoken, it's felt. This isn't mysticism, it's neuroscience applied to human behavior. The brain has mirror neurons, cells responsible for internally reproducing what we see in another person. When someone yawns and you feel the urge to yawn, it's them. But it goes much further. If someone moves confidently, your brain unconsciously associates this with dominance. If someone smiles with their eyes before their mouth, you feel emotional openness before any words. This is the invisible language of attraction. Silent signals that build an emotional environment of trust, tension, and curiosity. But here's the detail that destroys 90% of interactions. Insecure men try to compensate for their lack of presence with too much information. They talk too much, gesture too much, explain too much. They try to prove they're interesting based on facts, when they should be provoking feelings based on states. It's like trying to warm someone up with arguments. It doesn't work. You don't connect with what someone thinks. You connect with what someone vibrates. And every vibration begins with a single question. How does she feel in your presence? That's where magnetism is born. Magnetic men have a rare trait. They feel comfortable in their own silence. This causes a breakdown in women's automatic social systems, which expect the standard, the chatty, fast-paced, overly kind man. When that standard doesn't appear, her brain goes into investigation mode. Who is this guy? That doubt, that's where it all begins. And the magnetic man knows exactly how to extend this state. He doesn't reveal everything. He doesn't fill the silence. He doesn't rush to make sure she's comfortable. Because he understands, mild discomfort creates tension. And tension creates connection. This technique is known among social strategists as emotional calibration tension. You don't seek immediate comfort. You create peaks of mild emotional instability where the other person needs to position themselves, adjust, and engage. And it is in this adjustment that bonding is born. The mistake of the insecure is to confuse comfort with connection. But comfort creates friends. Well-measured tension creates fascination. A study conducted at Columbia University analyzed emotional response patterns in flirtatious interactions. The result was curious. Women reported greater interest in men who didn't seek to fill every space in the conversation, but rather paused, observed, and reacted with strategic delay. Why? Because this delay creates anticipation, and anticipation is the cradle of desire. It's like watching a movie that never reveals the ending right away. You have to stay until the end. With men, most want to be the movie that explains itself in the first 5 minutes. But the true seducer is the one who plants unanswered questions, who responds with looks, who says something and lets it echo. Because the power lies in what you leave hanging in the air. This is the essence of invisible language, provoking emotions without having to verbalize everything. You can do this with a tilt of your head, with rhythmic breathing, with a direct but non-invasive gaze. You can do it by maintaining a slightly slowed tone of voice, as if slightly bored, and yet completely present. This combination of presence and insouciance is addictive, because it activates a woman's unconscious insecurity in wanting to discover more. And here we enter a critical point, the game of performed presence. Many men try to simulate this state. They feign confidence, they force pauses, but their bodies betray it. The timing is robotic. The smile comes with the pause, as if rehearsed, and this breaks everything, because the woman feels it. Real presence can't be manufactured. It needs to be earned internally through what we call emotional authorization. It's when you don't need anything from the conversation. You're not there to obtain. You're there to observe, provoke, and reveal. This stance changes everything, because you position yourself as the mirror, not the salesperson. You don't sell your personality, you mirror hers. You hear something and respond with a provocation. She says, "I'm indecisive." You reply, "Then I imagine your love life must be a roller coaster." It's a light provocation, but it creates a new realm. Humor plus analysis, mystery. And then she responds, and you observe, and you throw in another subtle line, and she finds herself saying more than she expected, feeling more than she wanted, because you didn't follow the script. And women love it when someone goes off script, because the script is where ordinary men live. The ones who start conversations about the weather, the ones who compliment out of fear, the ones who tell stories to be validated. The man who masters the invisible language reverses this. He compliments like a joke. He asks like a challenge. He pauses like a command. And here lies the most underrated element of instant connection: emotional command disguised as naturalness. When you look a woman in the eye and hold it for half a second longer than is socially acceptable, something happens. She feels it. It's not about intensity. It's about intention. It's about showing without speaking that you're not afraid of the impact you make, that you don't need to soften your presence, that you're there as a force, not a demand for attention. This is where the tests women perform arise. Sharp comments, dry responses, subtle shifts in posture. She's reading you. She wants to know if you're holding the field. And the unprepared man reacts. He justifies himself. He tries to compensate. And then he loses. But the man who understands the game, he holds the field. He responds with a half smile, or a pause, or with a funny "you should think that," and changes the subject. He never plays into her emotional game. He changes the game. And that's hypnotic. Women connect with those who unbalance them with ease, with those who read them without forcing themselves, with someone who shows emotional mastery instead of verbal performance. That's why so many nice men are forgotten. And so many strange men become obsessions, because they don't go with the flow. They create a field. And in that field, the rules change. But there's a risk here. If you overdo the tension, it becomes arrogance. If you overdo the silent presence, it becomes absence. Therefore, true mastery lies in constant emotional calibration. It's knowing when to advance, when to pause, when to let her fill the silence, when to challenge, when to compliment unexpectedly, not for beauty, but for a trait. Not "you're beautiful," but "your way of speaking seems to hide something." This kind of phrase isn't a compliment. It reveals, it unsettles, it poses a riddle. And riddle is the raw material of seduction. The problem is that most men want security, but instant connection requires risk. It requires ambiguity. It requires the delicious discomfort of not knowing exactly what's happening, but wanting to keep going. It's the same feeling as a good book. You don't know where it's going, but you can't stop reading. And here's the turning point that opens the next level of this game. Communication isn't just about what you convey, but about how you activate the other person. And there's a specific element that transforms fascination into surrender, connection into desire, attention into urgency. It's when you stop trying to be interesting and become impossible to ignore. But to do that, you need to understand how to provoke emotional scarcity, narrative tension, and contrasting play without ever seeking validation. You need to master the most subtle and powerful field of connection. How to be interesting without seeming like you have to be. And to become impossible to ignore, you need to disappear from the race for approval. The game changes when you're no longer trying to win her attention. You're the experience she never expected. And it starts with a silent decision, not to vie for validation. Most men live in this automatic mode. They enter any interaction already seeking approval, whether in the form of laughter, a compliment, a quick response, or even visual attention. It all boils down to the same dynamic. Notice me, accept me, validate me. But here's the brutal truth. Anything that seeks validation places itself in an inferior position. And there is no attraction in inferiority. Attraction is tension. Desire is imbalance. Fascination is asymmetry. When you enter an emotional interaction seeking something, you automatically place yourself below the one who can give it to you. And this destroys any possibility of a genuine, magnetic connection, because she feels it, she senses it. And what could be a high-tension game turns into an informal interview, where you're emotionally begging to be hired. Now think about the men who truly create fascination. They don't demand space. They occupy it. They don't seek approval. They create discomfort, not in an aggressive sense, but in an enigmatic sense. They say things you don't expect to hear, not to shock, but to disrupt the narrative. And in that moment, the woman leaves automatic mode. She stops judging and starts reacting, because the game has changed. And that's the key point. The truly interesting man never tries to be interesting. He makes the other person wonder what's going on. And how do you do that? With contrast, with controlled absence, with a strategic dose of narrative detours. While ordinary men try to construct a logical, linear, and comfortable conversation, the man who understands the subtle game inserts detours. He says something that seems disjointed, then he falls silent. He changes the subject without concluding. And this isn't distraction, it's tension. Her mind wants to close the idea, but he won't let her. He opens another window, and another, and another. And before she knows it, she's trapped in a maze of stimuli. This kind of conversation isn't about making small talk. It's about building rhythm, timing, layering. It's a game of emotional unpredictability where you're the center of controlled chaos. And that requires not just intelligence, but emotional self-sufficiency. Because you need to be able to handle the emptiness, the lack of immediate feedback, the stern look, the silence after provocation. The man who masters this, masters desire. A simple example. She teases you. She says you seem cocky. The average man justifies himself. No, I'm just confident. The man who needs approval retorts, you don't seem that humble either. But the man who plays on another level just looks and says, cocky? You ain't seen nothing yet. And smiles. Then he changes the subject. He doesn't try to win. He doesn't try to explain. He simply plants an idea and emotionally disappears. This disappearance is one of the most powerful weapons of true seduction. The oscillation between presence and absence, between intensity and distance. It's like pulling an emotional rubber band. You appear with force, then retreat. You appear with a look, then withdraw. You create a moment, then vanish. And this breeds frustration. And frustration is the fuel of desire. Because women have a highly accurate radar for detecting attempts. And everything that's attempted becomes a performance. And performance, even when beautiful, is tiring. What holds you back is reality. And reality here is your emotional neutrality. It's the fact that you don't need it to work, because you're not there to win. You're there to explore, to enjoy the game, to see what happens if you poke at an idea. This completely changes the dynamic, and your energy says it all before you even say a word. This is the concept of unnecessary presence. A psychological state where you enter an interaction not to conquer, but to provoke. You want to see who she is, not to sell who you are. You ask questions with double meanings. You use metaphors. You create stories without an ending. You analyze without judgment. You turn the mirror on her, where she sees herself in a way she's never seen before. And that, my friend, is impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most overlooked point of this whole game is this. You don't need to be the center of attention to be the center of desire. Most people's mistake is trying to be the most talkative, the boldest, the most visible. But the true masters of instant connection operate in the emotional subterranean. They are remembered not by their sentences, but by their pauses. Not by their compliments, but by their subtle provocations. Not by their insistence, but by their contrast. And here lies the contradiction that few have the courage to explore. The more you seem emotionally distant, the more she tries to get closer. This isn't cruelty, it's design, it's emotional architecture. But it only works if it's done with pure intention, not fear. Because if you pull away with fear, she feels it. But if you pull away with dominance, she desires. This dominance is built on a truth that needs to be digested. You don't need to prove anything. Not intelligence, not beauty, not culture, not a sense of humor. The only thing you need is an inner world so rich that she feels the urge to explore it. And it shows in the details, in the way you observe, in the kinds of things you notice, in the way you formulate a sentence, in the silence between one word and the next. If what you've heard so far has ignited something inside you, a discomfort, a doubt, or perhaps a hunger for more, then you've already understood half the game. Because desire isn't born from certainty, it's born from emptiness. And now that you've seen how the invisible codes of connection work, imagine what happens when you access the forbidden manual. It's not a metaphor, it exists. And it's brutal. The forbidden manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds, isn't a generic ebook. It's a compendium of mental triggers, psychological principles, and social codes that have been hidden for one simple reason. They work too quickly. In less than 60 seconds, you can activate areas of a woman's brain that even she can't explain. And this isn't magic. It's applied behavioral neurology. While most people are still trying to start a conversation or ask, "What do you do for a living?" you enter with questions that dismantle defenses, activate dormant emotions, and masterfully project emotional scarcity. You become the experience she can't categorize. And all of this before she even says your name. Now pay attention. The content of this video has given you the map. The Forbidden Manual gives you the weapons, the exact words, the precise actions, the silent movements that break her logic. And that's why it's called forbidden, because when you access this kind of material, you stop playing the game and start manipulating the board. There's no honor in being ignored. There's no glory in being kind and forgotten. The world is cruel to invisible men, but brutally generous to those who understand how to operate between the lines of desire. And now you have a choice. Return to the real world, keep trying to be the nice guy, or dive into this universe that turns casual conversations into emotional collisions. If you want to get off autopilot, click the link, access the full audiobook, learn what ordinary men will never know, and become the kind of presence that pierces a woman's mind and refuses to leave.